Welcome. Okay. Okay, so we're recording. So welcome everybody to this lunchtime webinar. I just want to start by running through, hang on, sorry. I'll start again. Welcome everybody. I'm Laura. I'm going to be chairing this session that Emily is going to be presenting. This session is going to be recorded and then it'll be available again on our website at the end. And the chat is going to be monitored throughout the webinar. So if you have any comments or questions, if you're able to pop them in the chat box, we can take those at the end when Emily's finished presenting. So I'd like to introduce Emily today. She's one of our specialist speech and language therapists at AAC Therapy, and she's going to be presenting on less is more. So I hope you enjoy the presentation, and thanks for agreeing to present today, Emily.
Absolutely, no problem. Thank you, Laura. So as Laura's just kindly introduced, I'm going to be talking about a framework called Less is More today. So I'm going to talk you through what it is. I'm going to talk you through communication partner roles and priorities, break down how we look at those priorities. We're going to link the framework to the evidence base, and at the end, hopefully apply it to some case studies so that you can see how it's been actually used in real life, and therefore maybe kind of see how you might be able to use it as well yourself. So let's get started. So before I jump straight into what the framework is, bear with me, because I'll just explain kind of where it came from and how it came to be. So my clinical role and my main clinical experience is in the field of AAC, which I am sure everybody here knows stands for Alternative and Augmentative Communication. And I think typically we think about AAC in terms of paper-based, electronic, with your mid in the middle, and it's kind of a sliding scale. We can have anything and everything in between, multiple AAC systems in place, and that's typically how we think about it. But what I wanted to sort of establish at the beginning, at the onset, is that AAC isn't just for one client group, isn't just for one particular person, it's really for everyone. So whether you are using AAC as a communication partner and you're supporting an AAC user, or whether actually in your daily life, you're using AAC yourself as well. So that earlier slide here of it being paper-based, electronic, mid-tech, doesn't really allow for all of the other alternative communication systems that we as a society use, like signing, gesture, body language, facial expression. You know, I'm doing a lot of this now to augment the speech and augment how I'm telling you the information that I'm telling you. So often in clinical practice, when we think about AAC and we think about the barriers and all of those things, we're thinking about that sort of set model, if you like, that set image of AAC. And actually AAC being for everyone is something that is really what the Less is More framework is founded in. So I mentioned communication partners. If you're a communication partner, and I've worked with lots of parents of young children who might be brand new AAC users or not using AAC yet, and they're hopefully going to be successful AAC users in the future. I've worked with teachers and education teams who've got a textbook here, a communication book there, a pod book, and a grid device, a grid pad, sorry. And as a communication partner, it's often, and the things that come back to me is, Emily, I feel really daunted. It's quite overwhelming. I've got two children using two different systems. What do I do? It isn't working for me, or that system works for me, but this one doesn't. I might just leave it and let you do it. That's okay. Which to some extent is, that's what I'm there to support with. But it's easy to think, oh, they'll do it at home with mum or dad, or they'll do it in the evening with the carer, or they'll do it. And you know, because it feels overwhelming and it feels daunting, and that sort of unsure feeling comes into play, it can be really tricky to know where to start. So that's where Less is More comes in. That feeling of overwhelmingness and feeling too daunted Less is more is designed to reduce that. It's designed as a framework to give you a starting point of where to start. That question of what do I do? Less is more is really an answer to that question. So it's a framework that's based on my clinical experience over the last few years, lots of parental feedback, and lots of educational professional opinion. And there's other allied health professionals that are fed into this as well, OTs, physios, but it's really based on the MDT kind of approach and lots of clinical experience in the AAC field. It's actually a progression from a small scale service evaluation project that I did in 2019. So that was focusing on using aided language stimulation with a team of educational professionals to establish more consistent use of AAC in a classroom. And it worked, it was successful. The training program that we did was positive. However, there were still a lot of barriers to successful AAC use in the long run. So it impacted positively in the short run, but we were really trying to establish long-term successful AAC use. So what I did following that project was take a step back, discuss with parents and the aforementioned professionals, and look at, okay, what are the common barriers here? What are the shared issues that everybody is coming across? And what are the solutions that have needed to be in place to get over those? So what I did was put lots and lots of case studies together. So where AAC wasn't successfully established, or it was established in one environment but not others, and we needed to transfer those skills, I looked at what the barriers were, but most importantly, what the shared solutions were. So across case studies, were there any strategies that were consistently needed for successful AAC use? And that kind of case study evaluation identified 4 key essential strategies for successful AAC use at home and at school. So that is what less is more is. Each letter of less stands for one of those 4 essential strategies that's needed. So it's very much 4 things to remember. None of them require specific tools or equipment, so it's super easy to integrate into your daily life at home or at school if you're a professional. And it's a starting point to avoid us feeling like this, feeling overwhelmed. It's a starting point to support clinicians, parents, and teachers who establish successful AAC use across environments. Also worth noting here that it's not designed to reinvent the wheel. It uses the existing AAC literature base, evidence base, and the things that I use a lot in clinical practice, which I'll show you in a little bit. But they're all built in and integrated so that we're able to use the brilliant existing tools that are out there, but simplify everything, condense everything, make it a nice, easy, simple framework for everybody to use. So this is kind of the infographic now that's evolved as less is more has evolved. This is what we now use, and we've now got a few packs for carers and education professionals and parents that uses this infographic. So less, those are the 4 strategies, is more. So if we can do less as communication partners using those 4 strategies, the AAC user or the intended AAC user will be able to do more themselves over time. It's about successful AAC use, and what I'm going to talk you through as I show you the 4 strategies is how it ties in with that AAC good practice, how it links to the evidence base, what some of the barriers were as we look at the case studies, and what the solutions are, which are going to be the 4 steps of less. Before I jump straight into the framework, bear with me, we're going to look at the 3 types of kind of input that less is more is based on. So parental, educational, and the speech and language perspectives. And we're going to talk about those priorities, what everybody wants for the young person, how we meet those priorities, and it will tie together for you how less is more can be helpful to you. Then we'll go through the actual framework itself. So, from a speech and language perspective, my priority with an intended AAC user or a brand new AAC user is always to establish a system. Okay, so this young person needs an alternative system or a system to augment their primary method of communication. How am I going to establish that system? What assessments need to be done? Once we've got a system in place, my next priority is language development. Okay, so how can I support this young person to use more language to express the things that they might have been expressing non-verbally or that they might have been expressing but needed augmenting, language development. My third priority then is literacy development where possible. Can we use spelling, word prediction? Can we speed things up? Can we develop those higher level language skills? So that typically, it varies, but that is typically a very loose framework of what I generally try to work on. A key point here is that that's generally done in one speech therapy session a week. So that child or young person sees me for 1 hour a week or maybe 2 half-hour sessions, and we're trying to do all of this. These are our priorities. How do I do that? Lots of different things, as you can see, some quite formal intervention tools there, complex assessment generally, which involves the parents and involves the education team, but there's a lot of formal tools there being used. There's a lot of literature and evidence-based being applied to achieve those 3 goals. Parental priorities. So if we are a good MDT, we should be working alongside parents and everybody else, rather than just working as therapists independently. And the key thing that parents often feed back to me is that their priorities, again, is they want the child to communicate with the family, which is effectively functional communication. They want that child or young person to have a functional method by which to communicate. They want the child to be able to access family activities. And really, they want the child to be happy, which obviously is the number one priority. But for that young person to be happy, communication ties into everything we do, doesn't it? That young person has to be able to communicate in order for them to be happy and not frustrated and struggle and find things difficult to express. So parent priorities is about that family integration, that family unit, making sure that everybody has the best possible family experience. Communication is kind of essential to that. In terms of input, children are with their parents every day, evening, weekend, holiday, all the time. And parents will come to me and say, okay, you're providing therapy in school, or you're coming home and doing an hour a week, but when you leave us with that communication aid or that AAC system or whatever, what are we supposed to do as parents with it whilst you're not here? What's our role as communication partners? How are we going to implement this in the best possible way? This is where less is more comes in. So the less is more framework is a really lovely starting point for that what do we do question. And the really nice thing about it is there's no required equipment, no resources, there's nothing you have to have. You can tie it into your fun family days out, to your everyday tasks. So routine tasks are a really nice way to use less is more. Bedtime, tea time, bath time, snack time, cooperation with siblings, everything that you would normally do in your day, you don't have to do anything extra, is an opportunity for communication and for AAC use. Less is more is the how do we do it bit. And then education priorities. Okay, again, if we think broadly about what education teams have come to me over the years and said, they would like, firstly, the young person to have a system to communicate with the teacher and with their peers in class. Teachers then need to make sure that the child has, can use that to access the curriculum to make academic progress. And then teachers need to be able to measure that progress over time. But again, in order for all of that to happen, the young person has to have a functional system with which to communicate. Again, if we think about timescales, children are with their teachers and the peers every single day for 38 weeks a year. Again, parents will come to, education teams, will come to me and say, okay, you've sorted the communication aid. Thanks for that. Hopefully, again, they were involved in that assessment process. They knew what was coming. But how do I now make that work in my classroom with 8 other children and 2 staff members? These are the realities of the day-to-day of AAC, aren't they? It's not as simple as a system is put in place and voila, AAC is successfully established straight away. Again, how do educational professionals do this? Again, this is where less is more comes in. So the education teams can use less is more. Again, don't need any tools, don't need any equipment. In the normal everyday lessons, in functional tasks and typical routines, lunchtime, snack time, morning greeting, cooperation with peers during group activities and turn-taking games and PE and sports. And the speech therapist can obviously come in to be a little bit of training or support you with it. So the whole point, thanks for bearing with me, of me talking you through that, is that whilst everybody is working with the child in a different way, we all actually have a shared priority goal, and that is functional communication. So even though sometimes it feels maybe difficult to coordinate diaries and everybody sit down together and have a chat, we all are working for the same goal, for that same purpose initially, is we want functional communication. And yeah, we'll have different priorities and different things to do at different times, but hopefully, if we think about that foundation that we're all stood on and that thing that we all want as a priority, it's a functional communication system. We therefore are all really important communication partners. And that earlier side at the beginning of thinking, what do I do? As communication partners, less is more is kind of built on that foundation of what do I do? How am I going to do it? But we've all got the same goal. So less is more is our way to start progressing with those priorities. As we've just talked through how much time a child spends with everybody, I thought it was quite relevant to whip out Jane Corsten's poster there, which I'm sure, again, most of you will have seen. But I just want to sort of push that point that the speech therapist isn't always the most important communication partner. Okay, so by 18 months of age, babies have heard over 4,000 hours of spoken language, and yet we don't expect them to be fluent speakers. They're at that point of daddy go, mummy biscuit, perhaps. If our AAC users only see maybe symbols modelled twice a week for 30 minutes or in that one speech therapy session a week, it would take them 84 years to have the same exposure to aided language as that 18-month-old has had to spoken language. And remember, that's the daddy go, mummy biscuit stage. So we really, really need, as a team, to be using something like Less is More consistently together as communication partners to ensure that AAC success and establishment for the AAC user. I mentioned it's got existing literature tied in. So some of the things that I've used are the Money and Thurman's Means, Reasons and Opportunities model, Janice Light's writing and literature on AAC competencies, and there's an awful lot there. Things that I've often used as part of my clinical practice is what you can see there, the do's and don'ts of AAC from assistive wear. And that's a really lovely tool that I continue to use today. But one of the things as part of this project that a parent said to me was, that's great that you've given me this, thanks. But I've had to reprint it twice because I'd stuck it in the fridge and it dropped off and the dog had it. And it, you know, these resources, there's a lot of information on them, but they can be misplaced, accidents happen. They, in the context of a busy family life and a busy classroom, it can be really hard to remember all of these strategies, all of this information about how to implement AAC. Yes, there's a wealth of really great evidence and research out there to guide us, but it can be very difficult as a parent or as a teacher to know where to start with that and to know how to implement that effectively. And you've also got that worry of feeling overwhelmed and thinking, what if I do it wrong? What if I do it in the wrong stages? Am I going to hinder language development? There's so many worries and thoughts that crop up and that have been put to me by parents. I just think it was really important to take a little step back, incorporate as much of this as possible, but give a really nice, clear, consistent framework for everybody to work from. So without further ado, not going to start that video. Let's jump into Less is More in the 4 steps. So I mentioned earlier that every letter of Less stands for a strategy that was consistently required across over 20 case studies for successful AAC use. So L stands for let the child speak. So by this I mean, try not to jump in if they're trying to say something. Don't translate their speech for them if they're talking or their intended message. Pause and make sure that they are able to finish their message. And if they are using a communication aid, don't make them re-say it. Let them speak it however they want to speak it. If that's grammatically incorrect or they've only used a single word and you need more information, let them say it in whichever way they're trying to say it. By letting the child speak, you're doing less, you're taking a step back, you're trying to untrain yourself, if you like, of doing some of those things that we all do to do more. And I know it sounds really, really simple, but as part of that service evaluation project, I videoed myself working with lots of young people to evaluate the efficacy of the project. And I jumped in all the time. They would say something and I would anticipate the next bit, or say, did you mean this? And I would jump in all the time. And I looked back at some of the videos and I was horrified, because I am a speech therapist. This is my profession. I wasn't always consistently letting that child speak. And it's really, really, really essential. So not only will it allow the young person to use whatever language they've got and for us to respond appropriately, it will also increase their confidence to communicate in whatever way that they've done it. Okay, so L, let the child speak. And as well, it's, you know, it's not requiring you to use any particular equipment or do anything particular. E is for empower. So we're going to let the child speak. They've said their message, we've listened, we've valued it, we've acknowledged it. Now we're going to empower them by showing them. So we're not going to tell them, we're not going to instruct them, we're not going to direct them. We're going to show them how to convey that same message on their AAC system. Just modelling. But if somebody has signed drink, you're going to acknowledge that. That's a meaningful, intentional message. You've understood what they've said. So you're not going to make them say it again or jump in or do anything we've just talked about for let them speak. You're going to get the communication book, whatever it might be, and you're going to point to drink. And then you're going to go and get them a drink to show them that you've understood. All you're doing there is empowering them by showing them how to communicate that same message that this did on their communication aid. Same if they've gone to the fridge and they want some food and they've just gone to do it themselves. You would get the system, you would empower them by showing them where food or yogurt or, you know, whatever, if you wanted to be specific, is on their AAC system, so that they understand that they have communicated something, but they can also communicate this using language on their system. If you've done that as well, don't then make the child do it themselves. You don't need to say, right, now you do it. They've done it. They've gone to the fridge. They've signed drink. They've communicated. You're empowering them by showing them how they can do that using the AAC system. And don't use lots of excess language either. So all you're doing is less. You're going to cut out some of that chat. You're going to let them speak a little bit more. You're going to value whatever system they've used. All you're going to do is show them on their AAC system how to communicate the message that they've just done in whatever way that they've done it. You're doing less in order for the child in time to do more. If you're using lots of language, it gets a little bit more confusing. You know, whatever you're trying to empower and model becomes a little bit trickier to decipher. Keep it nice and simple. You've let them speak. You've empowered them by showing them on the communication aid or device or book or whatever. S is for stay positive. So I can feel some of you thinking, is that it? Stay positive. This, honestly, when I was doing the case study evaluation, and I was thinking, right, well, some of these have worked with this, some of them have worked with that. Being positive is probably one of the most important strategies as part of less is more. The second that a team around a child becomes negative or stops believing that the child can do it, the child does too. The child disengages, sometimes instantly. And as a speech therapist, I've seen really high abandonment rates, particularly of AAC systems, as children who transition from children to adult services, and information might not be communicated kind of across that bridge, or the new team that picks up the previous work thinks, oh, we'll try something different because I'm not sure they can do that. We need to be really positive. We need to believe in the child or young person, give them that self-belief, leads on from that empowerment strategy really, but we need to be really positive. And obviously being positive doesn't require any tools or particular sessions or equipment. So the positive thing about this strategy is there's not very much you have to do other than try and stay positive. And one of the things that parents often ask me is, oh, well, how can I be positive if they've made a mistake on their AAC system? And I say, well, a mistake on the AAC system is no problem. All you can then do is use that as a strategy, as an opportunity to empower them by showing them where the clear button is or the back button is, or then empower them by showing them, again, you're not using lots of excess language, but showing them where the word that they meant to say is. So you don't have to worry if something goes wrong. If you can try and stay positive, even when you make mistakes or the system feels a bit complicated, you know, we're able to show the young person that this is a new system, it's complicated, confusing, or it's daunting or whatever, but we can do it. That positivity is really, really essential. And the last S, strategy, is stick with it. So this was another thing that when I was doing the evaluation of the caseload, of the case studies, perseverance was really, really crucial. So where teams had given up with an AAC system in less than 6 months, we weren't seeing success. You know, we have to stick with the system. And when I say that, I mean that you're going to have to do that empower step over and over and over again, every day, every month. Be really, really patient with yourself and with the AAC user, because you're going to have to do it for, I'm talking months or years. If we're doing less, this doesn't require you to really do anything except stick with it. You're doing less, you're letting them speak, you're then empowering them by showing them, you're being positive, and you're sticking with it. That's not an awful lot for us as communication partners to have to do. We're doing less in order for the AAC user to have that independence and do more themselves over time. So, the summary, let's bring it back together. Less is more, 4 strategies, each letter of less. We're going to let the child speak, going to value their communication system, whatever it is, and let them say it as they would say it. We're then going to empower them by showing how to communicate on their AAC system. We're going to stay positive. Those negative reactions build negative associations really quickly. And we're going to stick with it. So we're going to be prepared to make AAC a habit over that period of months and years. It's going to be part of our daily routine, part of our everyday life at home and life in school. Less. The less we do, the more the AAC user will be able to do. So brings us back nicely to that infographic. That's how I then summarize it. 4 strategies, we do less, they do more. Application to practice. So I'm going to talk you through a couple of case studies just so you can see how this has been applied in real life. So the first young man I'm going to talk about is Jack, and he is a 16-year-old young man with autism spectrum condition. He's a non-verbal communicator. He had an iPad with Snap and Core first, and he lives in a residential care setting. So the reasons that Jack's AAC system, if you apply less is more to a system, it helps you really quickly to identify maybe where these breakdowns or barriers are occurring. So when Jack was gesturing at the fridge, signing or looking with his eyes and eye pointing, that non-verbal communication wasn't really valued as communication. So it was always responded to, or his needs were anticipated, but it wasn't valued as his way of actually communicating an intentional message. So Jack wasn't being sort of able to say what he wanted to say in the way that he wanted to say it, because somebody was jumping in and saying, all right, I think he wants a drink. And sometimes he was being overlooked, if you like, in that exchange of information. Parents were really empowering with Jack. When they came to visit, they were really, really keen on modelling and showing him how to use the language on his system. But the residential staff particularly felt quite confused about how to empower him. You know, they were doing a lot of the daily tasks and sort of those more boring daily tasks, should we say, the bath time, the bedtime, all of that stuff. And there's a lot to do. There's an awful lot to prepare Jack for those times. There's hoisting needed. Sometimes in the evening he was getting a bit grumpy and refusing to do things as well. And there's the personality of the AAC user factor in. So the residential team felt quite worried about how best to empower him and didn't feel that they were able to really touch his device because it was his device. So there wasn't a lot of modelling or empowerment going on. Parents were positive about using AAC, and the residential staff were positive about AAC as a concept, but felt really negative about having it at home. They were worried about it getting damaged. They were worried about how to use Snap and Core, and you know what I said earlier, if Jack made a mistake or pressed the wrong thing, or would press the same button and then listen to it, how did they respond to that? So the iPad, because the team felt like that little man on the first slide, really overwhelmed and really daunted by it all, was often left in a cupboard, and Jack was quite happy using his non-verbal systems because he could be quite direct with that, but he would then often use maybe behaviour more to communicate something more forcefully because he wasn't being heard. So yeah, there were then some sort of negative associations really with it not working as well. And in terms of sticking with it, the residential staff felt safer keeping it in the cupboard, and they weren't really prepared. They tried it for a few days, but then it was very difficult, understandably so, but it was left at home, and they didn't really want to persist in it. So it was not really used very much at school because it often wasn't brought over to school from residents with him. Staff in school and in residence both felt unsure about modelling rules and felt like there were some quite formal rules that should go with that empowerment step, and they weren't sure about how to do that. Jack was viewed as being very much in his own world, and because he didn't really initiate a lot of communication with others, he would initiate something really functional, but if you wanted to chat with him, he didn't particularly want to chat with you. He was sometimes seen as being uncooperative when he felt like that. And he socially was quite isolated. He didn't have any known friends, and he just had functional interactions with his peers. So AAC in general was quite unsuccessful for Jack. It wasn't supporting his independence. It wasn't working for him as a functional system. But if we apply those 4 steps of less, there's quite a lot of work for us as communication partners to do there. And it's not necessarily something that Jack needs to work on. It's something that we as communication partners can support him with to establish the successful AAC use. So we ran through the less is more framework. So I supported the residential team and the educational team, and we did a bit of training on letting Jack say what he needs to say in the way that he needs to say it. So the team around him started to value that non-verbal communication a little bit more. And when we were thinking about things like his behaviour, which had previously been seen as challenging, the actual way in to Jack being motivated to use his AAC system was to show him that it had an arguments page. So when he felt grumpy and he wanted you to go away, he didn't really have a way to say that beyond using his behaviour to make you go away. As soon as he realised that there was an arguments page and he could tell you, maybe in a slightly rude way, but using language in a very functional way to jog on, he was really motivated. And the team started to see his non-verbal communication and his primary method, that preferred method that he's got, that only method at that point, as really valuable and as something that they could start to channel towards AAC to support him with that language development and those expressive skills. So once the team had a little bit of training on that and they found that non-verbal communication valuable, they stopped anticipating what he wanted. They stopped, when he pointed at the fridge, guessing through all the items that he wanted, and started to empower him by showing him where the food folder was, and he could then make a specific choice. They started to show him where the toilet folder was. The toilet button was, to show him where the things that he was communicating non-verbally or through his behaviour, where they were on his AAC system. And because it was a nice, quick, instantaneous, I press this button, it speaks for me, someone gives me a quick reaction, Jack felt really empowered and was able to become a lot more independent. And the team around him felt a lot more empowered and more confident, actually, that they were responding to his communication in a really appropriate way. That then led on to everybody feeling a bit more positive. So the positive approach from parents meant that Jack had been kind of exposed to his system and been using it with them a lot. So he did use it quite quickly then to put words together. As soon as the residential staff came more on board, that increased the positivity around the system as well. The training that I implemented at the beginning helped with the positivity from the team. They understood more how AAC could be used and how we needed to work together to establish it across environments. But that positivity really not only supported Jack's AAC use, but really supported his general sort of demeanour and how he felt on a day-to-day basis. He was more happy to show us how capable he was. And then the team really stuck with it. and they realised that it was going to take more than kind of a couple of weeks of modelling and support to get AAC fully established in the home environment as a daily habit. But Jack ended up using his device functionally at home, in school, with parents in the community, with a range of different communication partners all the time. So he was kind of using 2 words to put together to communicate those messages. But we really, and in Jack's instance, it took us 2 full years to establish successful AAC use across those environments. But all we did was look at those 4. These were the 4 things that we kept coming back to. We kept it really simple. We didn't need particular kit or resources. These were the 4 things as communication partners that we needed to focus on. And that's what we did. So 2 years later, mega success for Jack. And he continues to be now a really confident, successful AAC user. My second example is a young lady called Poppy, who has CP, and her primary method, very different to Jack, her primary method of communication is speech. She uses an I110 device with grid 3 on it to augment her speech. So she'll communicate verbally 90% of the time, and if she would like to then augment what she said or convey something more about her message, she would use her communication aid. The idea was she would use her communication aid to support her to do that and to support her communication partners to understand that full message. But AAC, when I started working with Poppy, just wasn't being used at all. And when we broke it down and we looked at it together, if we think about that L step, Poppy's family were interpreting all of her spoken language for her. Her AAC wasn't even seen really as a valued method for communication for her. So I remember she'd gone to a GP appointment and she didn't speak to the GP at all. She spoke to the parents and then they spoke to the GP. And her AAC wasn't being used. So family were being really helpful, but were jumping in and anticipating that need and interpreting for Poppy. In terms of that empowerment step, the AAC wasn't being valued. Nobody was showing her how to use her device when she got stuck or when she needed to clarify her intelligibility. Nobody was empowering her by showing her how to find words or augment that speech, that function. So it just wasn't being seen or valued as a useful tool. The team around her generally felt really negative about the device and were worried it would take away from her independent speech. She started to hate it because she saw it as something that was going to, as something she had to use instead of speech. And that absolutely, whilst that's a negative association, it wasn't the intention, the point of the communication aid. But that negativity really had a very quick impact. And in terms of sticking with it, the team around her were really inconsistent with it. Nobody really stuck with the device. It was dusty when I pulled it out. So that perseverance wasn't happening. It wasn't seen as a tool that could be useful for her. But that independent communication was limited as a result. So when we implemented Less is More with family and with the education team around Poppy, we again did a little bit of training on letting Poppy speak. So when she goes to that GP appointment, as much as possible, let Poppy speak to the GP. You know, she's 11, but she's going to be getting older and going through high school and needing to communicate independently. Then let her communication partners signal if they haven't understood something before you jump in and translate it for her. Okay, because it wasn't even getting to the point of there being a communication barrier. There were no communication barriers because just everything was being translated for her. So we broke it down and said, okay, we really need to let Poppy speak here. Speech therapy sessions then focused on that empowerment. So showing Poppy how her AAC system could be used just to augment her spoken language. So as soon as that was established and she understood it wasn't intended to take away her independence, but actually to give her more independence, she became a bit more positive about it. Which then meant in speech therapy sessions, I was able to actually do a lot of spelling, literacy, word prediction work with her to speed things up for her. So when those communication breakdowns happened with less familiar communication partners who'd maybe missed a little bit of a sentence that she'd said or a word, or she could just type it out super quickly and it would take her 2 hits to find the drop down word and fill in that part of the sentence. She only used her device when her speech was unintelligible and that communication partner was unsure. But that then just took a bit of the pressure off of, I don't have to use it all the time. This is why it's here. People are starting to let me speak a bit more independently. I can use this as a tool to augment my speech, but I don't have to use it all the time. And that positivity really had a powerful impact in how much the device was implemented. Therapy was ongoing for nearly 18 months. It was holistic and consistent. So we did a lot of language work, alongside her kind of speech work. Over time, because that time was really important as well to build the positivity, not everybody became instantly on board with the AAC system, but by persevering and sticking with it, parents particularly became much more positive about it, had a better understanding of why the AAC system was in place and how it could be helpful, were able to let her speak more, and then when she got stuck, empowered her to be independent by showing her rather than translating for her and taking a little bit of that communication power away. So after 12 months, Poppy's system was successfully used across environments with lots of different communication partners, but we did therapy for about 18 months to make sure that we were working on some higher level language goals as well, to try and tie in at the same time. So again, a totally different kind of system, but 4 really, really simple steps, but being really, really essential to establishing AAC use for Poppy. Once I'd kind of worked with each individual family, we talked through, the speech therapist, and we've touched on this today. The speech therapist is supposed to be the AAC expert, if you like, the one that can provide the complex assessment, work with you, work to support you, to answer all of your AAC worries, questions, concerns. You know, when Jack's family were concerned about him pressing the same button and listening, we talked through typical literacy development within AAC, and as he started to listen, Jack ended up trying to say some of those words and repeat them. But initially the team were taking that away, so we couldn't do that, and they took it as kind of a stimming behaviour. So the speech therapist is there to work with you, with the individual client, to support with those AAC worries, questions, concerns as they crop up. Yeah, we're here to do that heavy lifting, if you like, of AAC and the formal interventions that I showed you earlier as part of that complex assessment. But you, the parent, the educational professional who spends so much time with that young person and that AAC system, is arguably the most important communication partner, because you've got that much more exposure and that many more opportunities to implement something as simple as less is more, to make sure that AAC can be a positive thing that's implemented throughout the day, all the time, across environments. And then the speech therapist can come in to help you with tech specific issues. But you guys as communication partners are the most important. And the key point really is that as communication partners, whoever we are, we're doing less with AAC in order for the AAC user to do more. And we should be stepping back, enjoying the AAC process as we see the child develop. Unfortunately, as much as we try to be helpful, the more that we do, the more that we speak, the more that we step in, the less the young person is able to do, and their independence and their language skills are potentially going to be a little bit slower in coming through. So we need to use those 4 steps of less in order for that child or young person to do more. So as part of this project, COVID kind of stopped how far we were able to implement it and put a pause on it, but we've shared some of the resources that have been created as part of this project with the AAC team at Manchester Metropolitan University. So some of those should be available for more broader use for any of you to download the poster and the AAC pack. I've had lots of contact with parents and education teams in implementing this and getting feedback from it and making sure where possible I was able to guide. But the idea is that it's really simple and should be, if you've got the little infographic and the steps and the how-to, if you like, should be nice and easy to kind of slot into your daily life. The idea was to use some video to capture progress and evaluate the framework. That's where COVID has kind of paused things a little bit. I've not been able to see as many people face to face and gather some of that evaluation evidence, but that can absolutely be ongoing. And I've used a team approach to evaluate. So with families. When we did do any training with Less is More, we then did a questionnaire to look at how useful that was, what the takeaways were, how easy it is to implement, to make sure that the strategies that we were suggesting are as easy to implement as I'm thinking they are. Because it's great, me again thinking about those different priorities, me as a speech therapist saying, oh, this should be dead easy, but I'm not at home or in the classroom with 8 other children or siblings or to contend with as well. So the idea was to really have a team approach to everything as part of this project, to ensure that it does work for the people it's intended to work for, and it can be implemented in an easy way. So there's some references there if anybody is interested in the kind of evidence base that I particularly used a lot. And I think we are at the point of opening out if anybody did have any questions. So thank you for listening and bearing with me.
Emily, there's a question in the comments asking where they can get the infographic from, as they think it's really good. That was from Rich McNally and Kira Dunn, I think, if I pronounced that correctly.
Thank you. You can email me if you would like, or you can email the info at AT Therapy there, and we can share that infographic. That will all, I'm not sure if it's on the ManMet website yet, but it's been shared and will be on there for people to download. So yeah, you will be able to get it from there, or you can email info at AT Therapy and get a copy.
Yeah. Oh, Jenny's just asked if you could flick back to the references, please, because it was too speedy for her.
Sorry, of course I can. Yes, not a problem. The Buchelman and Miranda reference is particularly, it's the book there, but when I was talking about aided language stimulation, so that empowerment step, if you like, that's what I used to think about aided language stimulation and modelling.
Yeah. Does anybody, I'm just wondering if anybody wants to ask Emily a question directly, if you want to put your hand up or ask a question. I know, Emily, I found it really informative and really relatable to my clinical practice. Like, I can think of already of a couple of clients I can use this approach with and the strategy. So I've found it really helpful, and time to stop and pause and think about those strategies and taking it back from down to the key nitty gritty of what we need to do.
Absolutely. It's just supposed to tie things together in a really simple way.
Yeah. So just wondering that anybody, if there's any other comments or any other questions.
Move on. Got a very quiet audience today.
Oh, Helen Bell has a question. Helen, do you want to ask the question of Emily, Helen? Do you want to unmute?
Right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Emily.
Hiya.
Nice to see you. I'm just wondering, you worked with parents, is that right? Did you get some feedback from parents on this?
Yeah.
Was it favourably received? Because quite often when I've worked with parents here in ManMet on some sort of like with physios in a joint kind of session, they're very much like, well, I don't get any sort of like feedback from the speech and language therapy. I don't even know what my child's using in the school setting, and I'd love to be able to model that at home. So I don't know, what was that similar experience for what you?
I found a lot of my parents initially, when I talked them through this, were sort of said, is that it? So especially about the being positive and the sticking with it. But at the same time, it was, once we'd made sure that the system was used and was shown, it concerns me a little bit, Helen, that some parents aren't aware of what system their child's using at school. That's obviously not ideal. The parents that I've been working with haven't been in that position, so they have been using the system at home as well, and are very aware of what the system is. So the general response has been, oh, being positive, is that? But when we broke it down a little bit more, we could see where maybe there were some negative associations building, and over time it's been received really, really well. Parents generally like the simplicity of it, and like that there's not loads of things they've got to do particularly, except less. Does that make sense? So everything they're trying to do now it's sometimes been perceived as a little bit of a relief from some parents that, oh, okay, it is all right for me to step back a little bit and just do these 4 things.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it completely takes the pressure off parents. Because I think they feel as though they're failing their child, don't they? Because they're not implementing any programs, or they don't know what's going on at school in the same way. And I just wanted to say it's so vital to take that family on this journey with you, right, as early as you can, and really get to know them really as much as that child, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of mentioned the AAC project earlier, but at the point of assessment for me, so if I'm working with a young person that needs a system, that doesn't have a system, at the point of assessment, I actually use the AAC spidergram to look at, to ask everybody on the team, what are their priorities? And this is why I structured the presentation in this way, because we should be working as a team, like you said, at that earliest point, at that assessment point, where we're looking at what system do we get? How's it going to work for everybody? How's it going to fit into that young person's life? Is it maximally effective and appropriate? So it would definitely worry me if you know, key players in that team aren't aware of the system. But which is why I've shared it with the AAC project stuff, because I just think I rely on that at the point of assessment. And I just think it's really important to reduce that worry and stress and pressure that absolutely is felt by parents in this AAC journey. Like you say, it's a journey, and it's going to be a long one potentially.
Yes, small steps, achievable steps. Leads to better outcomes, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And yeah.
Cheers. I really enjoyed that. It was really great. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Emily. And we've just had some feedback in the comments. And Matilda, I'm sure I'm not saying that right, joined from France and said it was very interesting. And she's from France.
Glad.
So yeah, thank you, Emily.
No problem. Okay, let's move us on then.
So just to make you aware, this webinar will be uploaded to our AT Therapy YouTube channel and also available on the website, AT website. Also, there's a number of therapists who have Instagram accounts which have lots of freebies. They're all detailed there. And we have an AT Therapy Facebook account. On the AT Therapy YouTube channel, there's also all the previous webinars and different training videos that are really helpful if you're working with parents and other people. And then coming up in June, the literacy webinar series on the 22nd of June is going to be about writing, and then Play Included, which is training for professionals, which is the rebranding of Bricks for Autism, is on Monday the 20th of September, and you can book and follow our courses on our Eventbrite page. So our next lunchtime webinar will be with Nikki Jones, which is the Brick by Brick program, looking at using brick play to develop social communication and interaction. So we hope you'll be able to join us for that. And yeah, it's been thank you very much for coming today, and thank you once again to Emily for a really informative and helpful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
And that's the end of our webinar today. Thank you.